Okay, welcome everyone. I'm Naftali for Nefesh B'Nefesh. Thank you for joining us. And this evening in Israel, which is, I guess, the middle of the day by you, we are going to go over the documentation that is needed for your Aliyah process. Let's start with what we're going to go over this evening. We're really going to cover the basics. We're going to go over all of the basic documents that are needed for Aliyah. It's the general overview of these documents. We will show samples. If you have specific questions and cases to discuss, then that will be for consultation with the Nefesh B'Nefesh representative. Many of you may have already applied, some of you may have not yet. So that will be, you can contact us and you can find our contact information on the website. Questions for this session can be asked in the Q&A. So on your toolbar for Zoom, you'll find the Q&A. The chat is not for questions. So questions that will be asked in the chat will not be answered. Please ask them in the Q&A. Specific questions that will be, that pertain to everyone will be answered publicly at the end. And all the other questions will be answered as I speak by our other panelists who are here. Thank you for the rest of the staff that has joined us behind the scenes, assisting with the tech and with the questions. Okay, so let's get started. So the Aliyah process is a heavy bureaucratic process. It includes a lot of documentation. And in order to determine what documents are required for you in order to prove your eligibility for Aliyah and be able to arrive here on an Aliyah flight, we and the Jewish agency will need to know all sorts of details about your background. We recommend that you start your application at least 8 to 10 months prior to Aliyah, with no commitment that you will complete your Aliyah in that time. It can sometimes be done in less time, but it's recommended to allow yourself that time to make sure that you'll be able to both gather all the documents and plan for your arrival for other things, such as your employment or whatever it is you're going to be doing here, and your finances and your housing, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes to documentation, we first need to know when and where you were born. That can make a difference in the documents that are required. Who your parents were, what their Jewish lineage was, can also make a difference. For instance, when and where you were born, applicants, olim, born in former Soviet countries, or born in North Africa or Arab countries, have additional requirements beyond what's going to be spelled out in this presentation, in this webinar. So keep that in mind, that sometimes your background and where you were born, what year you were born, can make a difference. An interesting example is if someone was born in Israel prior to 1952, or is the child of someone who was born or lived in Israel prior to 1952. Sometimes it's a question whether or not that person is or is not an Israeli citizen, and therefore the documentation can change. So that's an example of how, when and where you were born can affect the documentation required for Aliyah. 1952, by the way, is the year that Israel established a citizens registry. So anyone, even if you were here or your parents were here in 1948 when the state was founded, the registry didn't exist till 1952. And we sometimes encounter cases in which someone was born here during those years and left before 1952, and then there's a big question. Are they Israeli? Are they not Israeli? Can they make Aliyah, et cetera, et cetera. So there are interesting cases depending on your background. If you spent time in multiple countries as an adult or hold multiple citizenships, that can also affect your requirements, the documents that are required for for Aliyah. If you were a previous temporary resident or you've made Aliyah in the past, that will also have a bearing on your Aliyah process, on the bureaucratic aspect. It can affect other things such as your eligibility for Aliyah benefits, but that's not the topic for this webinar. Here we're going to focus on the documentation and how that affects the documents. I forgot to mention this. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be sent to you. So if you miss something, you'll always be able to reference back. Any web links that I refer to will also be sent to you as a summary and a follow-up after this session. Okay, so let's dive right in. And as I mentioned, questions should be asked in the Q&A. The chat is for us to share information with you. Okay. So the first basic document that's required of everyone who's making Aliyah, before we talk about the basic document, I'm going to mention the word apostil many times this evening. Apostils are required on many documents. And let's clarify now and get it out of the way what exactly an apostille is. So an apostille is an international, it's actually part of the Hague Convention, and it's an agreement that states that have signed into this agreement accept the documents from other countries when an apostille is attached to it. So for instance, the state of Israel could say to the United States or Canada, why should I recognize documents that you issue? Why should I say that a birth certificate issued in the state of Arizona is valid? So in order to make the validity international, they attach an apostille to it. The apostille is actually a chain of signatures, as we'll see shortly. The apostille certifies that the signature on the document is indeed an authentic signature. It does not authenticate the document itself. It authenticates the signature or the seal that's affixed to the document. So that's what an apostille is, and in order to verify that your documents will be accepted when you make Aliyah, the apostille needs to be attached to a whole bunch of the documents that we're going to discuss. Some countries, such as Canada, are not part of the apostille and the apostille agreement. And therefore, in those countries, what's required, as you see the sample here on the screen, is to get a consular authentication. As you see, there's a red ribbon. So it's similar to a notary, but it's only done by the Israeli consulate. So in order to authenticate Canadian documents, the document needs to first go to the Global Affairs in Ottawa. And once the Global Affairs has authenticated the document, it needs to go to the Israeli consulate to have this notarized page attached to it. Some documents don't need the Global Affairs, so the Jewish Agency in Canada will guide you as to exactly if it can go directly to the consulate or needs to go through Global Affairs. Most documents do need both steps in order to certify and authenticate Canadian documents. Okay, after that, now we can dive right in. So the first basic document that's required for everyone is your identification, is a valid passport. Passports need to be valid for at least a year. That's the regulation. However, during COVID, and you can see here, this passport is valid for the next 5 years. However, during COVID, due to the difficulty to renew or acquire passports, they are accepting passports that are valid for only 6 months. This is currently the regulation. It could change at any minute. So right now, we're still instructing you and other Olim that if you have a passport that will be valid for 6 months when you get the approval for Aliyah, that should suffice. However, it could change, and it could change in the middle of your process as well. And then you will be required to get a passport that is valid for a year. Okay, after that, what's required is a birth certificate. A birth certificate needs to be a long form birth certificate, which means that it includes a name, it includes, of course, birth date, and it includes parents' names. So that's what, when we say long form birth certificate, that's what it means. Some states have different types of long form birth certificates. For instance, New York has a whole bunch of different formats of the long form birth certificate. Some of them have an additional stub at the bottom. That is not necessarily required. What's required is to have the information, as I said, the birth date, name, and the parents' names. In Canada, many people have a little card. Some of these little cards, I didn't put a sample in this presentation, some of them actually have the parents' names. If it has the parents' names, it usually is accepted as a birth certificate, as long as it can be authenticated. The birth certificate must be authenticated with an apostille or a consular approval, as we mentioned before in Canada. In this case, I brought an example from New York to show you that in order to get the apostille, there are additional steps required. In this case, you'll see here that the document was signed by Irene Scanlon. And the county clerk, Audrey Pfeffer, authenticated Irene Scanlon's signature in this form, in this Queens County authentication document. On top of that, you can get the apostille. And here you see that the apostille certifies Audrey Pfeffer's signature. It's important to point this out. We encounter a lot of New York documents. Some other states in the United States also have a similar 2 or 3 step authentication. It's spelled out on our website with instructions for New York where to get these things done. The process is a little different now with COVID because the office for apostille authentication in Manhattan is essentially shut down, and you really need to go through Albany. We recommend, if you want to save yourself hassle and can afford it, to use a service to get this done. They know all the tricks, all the shticks. They can get it done faster than most people can do it individually. If you are good with paperwork and following up, you can do it yourself, of course. It's cheaper. We have 2 services on our website. Again, the links will be sent to you as a follow-up. On our article about apostilles, there are 2 links to 2 companies who give discounts to our Olim, so just mention to them that you're from Nefesh B'Nefesh. So again, I'm going to show you that the idea of an apostille is to authenticate the signature. So you see Irene Scanlon signed this birth certificate. In New York, that would require county approval first. So that's what you see here, that her Irene Scanlon is certified by Audrey Pfeffer, and Audrey Pfeffer authenticated, Whitney Clark authenticates Audrey Pfeffer with an apostille. Apostilles must be issued by the state in which the document was issued. So if you contacted some service that doesn't know what's needed for Aliyah, and they go ahead and get you an apostille on a copy from, let's say, Kansas, which is pretty common, or any other state, you have to realize that that's not going to be used and approved for Aliyah. The apostille needs to be attached to your original document by the State Department of the state in which the document was issued. So even if you're currently living in California, but your documents are from Pennsylvania or New York, you will have to get the apostille from Pennsylvania or New York. You can't get it notarized and then authenticated by the State Department in Sacramento in that case. Okay, so just be cautious that you're getting the apostille from the correct State Department. Okay, next is marital or personal status documentation. This also requires an apostille. In this case, you see a marriage certificate from Virginia. And once again, you'll see, here's the, I'm not sure exactly how to pronounce her name. I think it's Ochua or Ochu, I'm not sure. But in any event, you see the signature down here. And here it is, it's certified by an apostille, Maria Patricia Ochoa. Marital certificates also require that apostille certification. You will be required if you are previously divorced or widowed and then married again to present marital status certification for every step. So if you had multiple marriages or divorces, you will be required to show each step, and the document will have to have an apostille. So for someone who's married for a second time due to a divorce, you will need the marriage certificate from the first marriage with an apostille, the divorce certificate from the first marriage with an apostille, and then marriage certificate with an apostille of the current marriage, and so on and so forth for whatever your situation may be. If you've never been married, you will not be required to present any documentation proving that you've never been married. So again, the important point here is to remember that if you've been married several times, you need to show the whole sequence of your marital history with documentation that's certified by apostilles. Next is your proof of Judaism. The proof of Judaism typically for the Aliyah process is a letter from a rabbi in a recognized community, in any denomination, Reform, conservative, Orthodox, it doesn't matter. And it has to be on letterhead from the congregation. So for instance, in this case, if Rabbi Peled has his own stationery as well, his own letterhead that just says his name on it, even though he's the rabbi of this synagogue, he will be required to rewrite the letter on the synagogue letterhead and not on his personal letterhead. Okay, so it needs to be on synagogue or temple letterhead, and it needs to state simply that it could say, I know Naftali Droven, that's my name, not the daughter, but the son is Jewish and born to a Jewish mother. So that's the simplest way to write the rabbi's letter. We see many letters in which the rabbi writes a whole long paragraph after paragraph about the character of the applicant of the Oleh and how wonderful the person is and how much they contribute to the community, etc., etc. We believe it. We love you all of our Olim. It's not required as part of the proof to what will allow you to make Aliyah. It's a simple attestation. It's a simple, sentence saying, I know this person, the child of so-and-so, is Jewish and born to a Jewish mother. In cases in which the mother is not Jewish, the Oleh's mother is not Jewish, rather we're talking about a Jewish father or grandparent, the letter needs to reflect that. So for instance, in this case, you can see, I can confirm that so-and-so's father, and he puts the father's name in, is Jewish. He grew up at Temple Beth El, son of 2 Jewish parents, so-and-so, etc., etc. We don't really need to know about the bar mitzvah. It just needs to state that the rabbi knows that the father is Jewish and that the parents of the father potentially is a good idea to mention here as well. In certain cases in which the Jewish agency is not satisfied by the letter, they can require additional documentation. Often in cases in which the Aliyah is being approved based on a Jewish father or Jewish grandparent, the marriage certificate of the parents or the grandparents is required, or they may ask the rabbi to give more details in this case. Rather than writing a one-liner, I know this person to be born to a Jewish father, they may ask for more details about the rabbi's acquaintance with the family, with the father, to make sure that the rabbi is indeed acquainted and knows what he's giving testimony to. The other situation in which other documentation is required for proof of Judaism. Now, again, remember that this is a core piece of your Aliyah approval, because Aliyah to Israel is based on law of return, which is for people who are Jews or descendants of Jews. And therefore, this is a very significant piece of the paperwork, even though it's not state issued and it doesn't require an apostille and it can't be authenticated that way. It's still quite important. I will mention before we move on to one more aspect of this, a different case. Not all temples and synagogues are recognized. They need to generally be affiliated with one of the rabbinic organizations in order to say that this is a recognized community. There is no access to a list, so to speak, but the more established and the more affiliated with an organization the community is, the more likely it is that the letter will be accepted. In recent years, even letters from big rabbinic organizations such as the OU or the RCA are not necessarily accepted. Sometimes they are, sometimes it's not, and you have to keep that in mind. In certain cases, if someone is living in the United States for, let's say, for a short time, but they're actually from a European country or elsewhere, then the Jewish agency, depending on your history, remember the history is relevant, where you come from, where you grew up, they may ask for a letter from a rabbi in your country of origin, because that would make more sense. Someone who's more familiar with your history rather than somewhere that you've just been living for a short time. Next is conversion. Conversions are also make you eligible to make Aliyah, to have Aliyah eligibility. And for conversions, there are multiple documents that are required. What you see here is a sample of a conversion certificate in which the Beit Din, the rabbinical court, states who it is that converted and signed by 3 rabbis. This is what's required. This happens to be an Orthodox conversion. Conservative and Reform conversions are also accepted in a very similar format, with the signing of 3 rabbis stating that so-and-so converted to Judaism. In addition to the conversion certificate, there's a requirement for the rabbi to write a letter describing all the preparations that were done to study and belong to the community prior to the conversion, including a syllabus spelled out. It could be a syllabus that actually says the whole course study, or it could be a syllabus that just states, these are the topics that were covered in such and such period of time. In addition to that, the rabbi needs to provide a letter saying that the applicant participated in a community for at least 9 months post-conversion. If you've converted to Judaism but haven't been in a community, if you haven't belonged to a Jewish community for at least 9 months after the conversion, you're going to have to wait until that period of time has passed before you're eligible for Aliyah. There are situations in which if you converted in one place and your involvement in a community is in a different place, that can be approved. It's a little more complicated, but it can be approved. For instance, we do find that people convert and then are encouraged by their rabbis to come to Israel for a study or an experience, and they belong here to either some sort of yeshiva or a study program, etc. That can be approved. It isn't always approved. It isn't always so smooth, but it can be. It can work for Aliyah purposes. In addition to participation in the community and a letter pertaining to that participation, you're required to write a personal letter describing your journey into Judaism, why you decided to convert, how you were inspired to convert, your connection to Judaism, etc. Those are documentations that are needed for to prove your eligibility for Aliyah based on a conversion. Again, some of the cases can be complicated, and in such cases, the Jewish agency, of course, is allowed to ask for additional documentation or asks for more specifics from the rabbi, depending on what it is that it says in the letters. Okay, next is your criminal background check. Criminal background checks are required from Aliyah applicants from all countries in which they lived for at least a year from the age of 14. So if you grew up in Europe, if you grew up, I saw one of the questions fly by, if you grew up in Belgium and you moved to the United States in your 20s, and now you're making Aliyah, you will be required to provide a background check from Belgium and the United States, as an example. Canada and the United States are common that we have people who are required to provide both. The background check can be acquired directly via the FBI, or most commonly by all sorts of channeling companies, which are available anywhere. So if you go into Google and type in channeling company with your zip code, you will find a whole bunch of services. Some post offices offer this service. The apostille on the background check looks like this. They're all the same. In this case, the apostille is federal. So it gets sent to the State Department in DC. It's actually processed in their offices in Virginia. And the apostille on this document, on the background check from the FBI, only a federal background check is recognized for the purposes of Aliyah. Not a local background check from the precinct or sheriff's office or state police. It has to be federal. So in this case, if you're making Aliyah from the United States and you're required for an FBI background check, you can get around the apostille requirement by going to specific locations in the post office. Those locations will return your result of the background check via a link directly from the FBI, which you don't open. You send it to the Jewish agency. They will download your background check and send you a copy. And since it came directly from the FBI, it doesn't require an apostille. The details of this process, of all the different options, are on our website on an article regarding apostilles. Again, that link will be sent to you in the follow-up to this presentation. Canadians are required to present a background check from the RCMP. This is what they usually look like. The background check from the RCMP is then required to go to the global office in Ottawa, and from there to the Israeli consulate. And here you see another sample of the notary, you see the red ribbon, the notary authentication here authenticates the signature of the clerk in, I didn't add the middle page here, I apologize, but it authenticates the name of the clerk from Global Affairs in Ottawa, which authenticates this signature on the background check. So this is the only background check that is accepted from Canada. Again, not local police, only RCMP. In addition to all those forms, there are certain forms that are required by the Jewish agency. The Jewish agency has its own slew of application forms. So the first is a waiver of confidentiality, which looks like this, in which you allow the Jewish agency to use your information with the different ministries and organizations in which they work with to process your Aliyah. You're required to present a health declaration. The health declaration, there's a bunch of old versions of the health declaration floating around, and sometimes we have this problem with Olim submitting the wrong one. If your health declaration doesn't say COVID-19 on it, you see right here, it says COVID here. Let's put a little circle around it. If it doesn't say COVID-19 on it, then it's not the right version. you must fill out this form. It has 3 pages, as you see here, the other 2 small pages over here and over here. Okay, so it must say COVID-19. This is the one that's available on your portal. And this is actually a good opportunity to mention that once you apply for Aliyah, if you're not an applicant yet, once you apply for Aliyah, you'll have a personal portal on the Nefesh B'Nefesh website. On that portal, based on the answers that you gave us, based on your background, a list of all of your required documentation per family member will appear there. And you will be able to upload it there. And that's the optimal way to submit your documents into the system. Our system is shared with the Jewish agency. So whatever you upload there goes to us and to the Jewish agency. And on your portal, if you don't have one of the generic Jaffe documents, such as this one, you can download it there. So this is what appears there if you don't have it. And you can always reach out to an Aliyah advisor, to your Aliyah advisor at Nefesh B'Nefesh, and they will be glad to send you copies of the documents that you need. Okay, another Jaffe document that is required is an entry and exit form. The reason the Jewish agency needs to see your entries and exits to Israel is to determine your eligibility for Aliyah benefits. I always tell Olim, fill this one out as if you're Israeli. Don't spend too much time on it. It's important to state when you were there, when you left, when you entered. But if you come and go often, month, year, usually that's okay. If the Jewish agency is not satisfied, they'll contact you and tell you that they need more details. Try to be as specific as you can, but information that you don't have, you can skip and move on. As long as you're clear on the extent, the length of time that you spent in Israel. That's the important information here, the length of time that you were in Israel. Okay, next is proof of living abroad. For most Olim, proof of living abroad is just pictures of old passports. The cover picture like this, this was from the web, so I didn't delete all the information. If it's on Google, I can share it with you. So that's what's usually required from you in order to prove that you weren't living in Israel in the last 7 years. For those with Israeli background, there are different requirements for proving that you lived abroad. If you are what we call a katin chozeh, and you were born in Israel and then left Israel as a minor, and now you're returning as an adult, you will need more extensive proof for you and for your parents of living abroad. The details of this can be found again on our website. There's an article that covers all of the information that we're discussing this evening regarding documentation. If you type in Google documents for Aliyah NBN, you will find it, and we will send it to you after this session. And there it specifies, based on your status, what's required of you in regards to proof of living abroad. Now in COVID, there are a couple additional requirements. As far as documents go, it's important to note this declaration that you need to sign close to your Aliyah flight, stating that you understand the regulations and that you know that you need to do a PCR test prior to your arrival, and that you will be in quarantine when you arrive, based on the current quarantine regulations, or self-isolation, whatever you want to call it. Here in Israel, it's called bidud. There is an availability, if you don't have where to quarantine in a hotel, and the declaration will be different if you're staying in a hotel or quarantining, and if we're going into quarantine in a private residence of your own. The regulations for quarantine right now are that Olim must quarantine in a separate private apartment that has its own entrance and its own bathroom. In addition to this, I didn't bring a sample because it's a link to a website. within 24 hours of your flight, you need to fill out an additional quarantine statement for the Ministry of Health. This one is for the Jewish Agency, as their logo here at the top. There's an online form that you fill out prior to travel, but that's within 24 hours of your arrival, and you'll be instructed how to do that by our flights team and your Aliyah advisor. I want to reiterate that those are the basic documents that are required for Aliyah. There are additional documents that can be required based on, depending on your circumstance. So for instance, we mentioned Olim born in former Soviet countries, or born to people who were born in the former Soviet Union and moved to Western countries. The approval process for your Aliyah is combined with the Jewish Agency and Nativ or Lishkat HaKesher. It can take much longer, and additional documentation will be required. So if you fall under that category, allow yourself extra time to prepare for your Aliyah approval, up to a year or even a year and a half in some cases, in order to make Aliyah when you want to. If you are Israeli, the documentation can change depending on your status, if you were born abroad or if you were born in Israel, and even more so if you are an unregistered Ezrach Oleh. What that means is that you were born to an Israeli parent outside of Israel and never registered at the Israeli consulate as an Israeli citizen. So in order to make Aliyah, you must first register as an Israeli citizen. That process has its own slew of documents that we're not going to get into right now. And once you have an Israeli passport and you're registered as an Israeli citizen, you can then be approved for Aliyah and get an Aliyah flight and get your Aliyah benefits. Adoptions, name changes are documents that require apostils. Name changes can be complicated because if you've chosen, for instance, to drop your middle name or add a middle name, sometimes that can require extra proof or documentation. There are sometimes errors on documents. Sometimes it's very common, for instance, in New York and other states, for males to not have a name on their birth certificate. Often it's added, either penciled in or added on the back of the document. But we do encounter cases in which the vital records were never updated of the name that was given, and it just says male. So it can say male Schwartz, and then you will need to go to court to add your name, your given name, to that document. Previous marriages and divorces we've mentioned. In certain, following your health declaration, in certain health situations, letters from doctors or either physicians or mental health professionals can be required in order to make sure that it is safe for you to arrive in Aliyah. The Jewish Agency has prerogative to ask for all sorts of documents, so keep that in mind. Generally speaking, what we just went over is what's going to be required, but you may have some extenuating circumstance that will mean that you need additional documentation. One other document that I'd like to mention that I didn't bring up, and it's not here in the bullets, is something called two actually. One is a family obligations form, which is required in cases that someone's making Aliyah and leaving minor children behind. For instance, if someone's divorced, making Aliyah without their minor children, then you will need to have your spouse sign consent that they know that you're making Aliyah and that you don't have any pending obligations to those children, or you're fulfilling those obligations, etc. So that's another document that could be required. And in addition to that, if married couples are making Aliyah separately at different dates, then they will be required to provide what's called a split Aliyah form, that they declare mutually that they understand that they're making Aliyah separately, how that affects their Aliyah benefits, and that it's okay with both sides. That document is a declaration similar to the Jewish Agency documents that we showed previously, And it requires to be notarized and then have an apostille on the notary stamp. They take that, the Jewish agency takes that one very, very seriously. Okay, I'm gonna take a look here just to see what other questions we still have pending here, and to see if there are any of them that need to be answered here live in this session. So someone here says they went to the post office and they only do fingerprints for people 18 and over. I've never encountered that problem. I think it is available. If they won't do it at the post office, they go to a channeling company. You can contact the channeler. Let me go to the ones that I see I don't have answers being typed for them. Agencies, what is the cost of an apostille? Barbara, you asked about the cost of an apostille. Generally speaking, in the market, if you go to a service, an agency, they take roughly $200 to $250 per document. The companies that we work with have lowered their prices to $140, $120, and sometimes even less than that for apostilles. So again, that'll be in, if you go into our apostille article, that'll be the services that we have mentioned in that article at the end of the article. For anyone who wants individual advice, you can call 1-866-4-Aliyah. Our contact information is on our website. You can email aliyah@nbn.org.il. Again, the contact information is on the website, and then you can go through specific questions that you have. If you've already applied and you have an Aliyah advisor assigned, of course, you're in touch with your Aliyah advisor and they'll be able to answer any of your specific questions regarding documents and anything else, of course. Someone asked here about being adopted. Someone was adopted at a young age. So generally speaking, if you were Jewish at birth and adopted by Jews and were not converted, if you can prove that, if you can bring a rabbi's letter, or sometimes there's even adoptions that were done through a Jewish adoption agency, if you can bring proof to the fact that you were Jewish at birth and then adopted by a Jewish family, that should be sufficient in order to approve you for Aliyah. If you were adopted you were born as a non-Jew and adopted and not converted, you're still eligible to make Aliyah as a child of a Jew. So your Aliyah paperwork needs to reflect that situation. One of the most common situations in adoptions that we do encounter are those who are adopted as non-Jews converted. And then there is the requirement to provide information about the conversion. It's good that whoever, I don't even see the question anymore, but whoever asked, thank you for the question. I didn't mention regarding conversions, back on here, we can go back to the slide about conversions. So if you were adopted as a minor, all you need is the conversion certificate. So let's say someone was adopted as a baby and now is 25. So you were adopted as a minor and you're making Aliyah now as an adult. All you need is the conversion certificate and a current letter stating that you're still involved in Judaism or you're still Jewish. Sorry, I confused you. Not adoption, conversion. If you were converted as a child, you don't need all these other additional letters. So if you're converted as a child, you obviously didn't go through a preparation course and you've obviously been living a Jewish life. So you can skip over all of that, the conversion certificate, and then a current letter from a rabbi stating that you're still involved in, that you're still Jewish. So that connects to the adoption question because sometimes that comes together. If you converted over 10 years ago, again, you don't need all this. You just need the conversion certificate and one additional letter from a rabbi. So those are some additional circumstances that came up from one of the questions here. Belgian documents, someone asked here, usually come in multiple languages. So when you order them, Belgian documents are actually really easy to order online. So you order them online, they come in English, and you get the apostille online, and they're delivered to you digitally. So it's actually very convenient. So that's that was done. I'm not sure what that question is. Let's see what else is here. So if someone is not affiliated with a community, they'll have to contact family members who are affiliated with the community. It is the Ole's responsibility to find proof of Judaism. So if you did not grow up affiliated in a synagogue or a temple, you will have to find a way to find a rabbi who knows the family and is willing to write the letter. Unfortunately, if you cannot do that, you will not be able, most likely not be able to prove your affiliation to Judaism and your eligibility for Aliyah. In some cases, people can link themselves to parents or grandparents by other documents or tombstones or burial information for those who were buried in Jewish cemeteries, but it becomes very complicated. So our recommendation is to contact family members who are affiliated and see if they can help you with their rabbis. Proof of Judaism, rabbi letters, they're not state-issued letters, and therefore they do not require apostille. So the only documents that require apostilles are official state-issued documents, and if you're doing split aliyah, the split aliyah form needs to be notarized and then apostille. So state-issued documents are birth certificate, marital or personal status certification, background checks, adoption, name changes, court orders, divorce, death certificates. That's what I mean when I say state-issued documentation. A year and a half or two is a bit early to start your process, but it's good to look into the information, see what's required of you, and see if there's anything that's particularly tasking for you to acquire. For instance, if you're elderly and you were born in a foreign country, if you don't live where you were born, or all sorts of things like that. So it's worth looking into what it'll take from you to get the documents and then prepare them in advance. I remember that I wanted to make a comment about apostille. Someone asked about the cost. It's always cheaper to get the apostille from the State Department directly. Most state departments have mail-in service. With COVID, especially in New York, the processing time with these companies was somewhat problematic. But most services now are back to reasonable service times. In regular times, most state departments will offer you 24 or 48-hour turnaround, and they have different rates. They'll have like the regular processing time, 3 weeks will cost you X, and expedited service within 24 hours will cost you $50 more or whatever it is. You can find the information by just typing in the word apostille and whatever state the document is from. So if you have a birth certificate from Utah, you just type in apostille Utah and the information will come up and guide you to their website. Let's see, we have a couple more minutes for a couple more questions here. So someone asked here about if you're in Israel coming to the office, to the Jewish agency or the Nefesh B'Nefesh office with your documents without apostilles. So no, actually that's not how it works. We covered in this presentation all the documents that are required for Aliyah from abroad. Most of the documents that we discussed here are also relevant if you're making Aliyah from within Israel. So your passport, birth certificate, marital status, proof of Judaism, background check, those are all going to be relevant if you're making Aliyah from within Israel as well. What's not going to be required is the specific documents from the Jewish agency, but there's a whole set of other application forms directly to the Ministry of Interior, Mishrad Pnim, that would need to be signed. So the documents, that's why I didn't make such a big deal about separating if you're making Aliyah from abroad or from within Israel, because the documents are generally the same. The requirements to prove your identity and your eligibility for Aliyah don't change if you're making Aliyah from abroad or making Aliyah from within Israel. We recommend, again, someone asked, we recommend 8 to 10 months in advance of your Aliyah to prepare, to start preparing so that you can make Aliyah when it is that you actually want to complete the process. Okay. Oh, I see here apostilles. How long apostilles are valid? Once an apostille is affixed to your document, it's valid forever. It has no expiration date. There is a requirement for a letter of recommendation for Aliyah and for an essay. Those are parts of the online application. So when you fill out the application, you will see those requirements. Having illnesses is not a problem for making Aliyah, unless it's a severe mental illness that it makes the applicant dangerous for himself, herself, or for society. Other than that, having illnesses, we wish everyone a speedy recovery, but having any type of illness is usually does not prevent you from making Aliyah. Okay, thank you all for attending this evening. It was a pleasure having you here, and I hope this was informative and helpful to you. And we look forward to welcoming you here at home in Israel. Take care, have a good one.